Hi there, this is Dr. Everybody. I want to talk a little bit about how to take exams. Let me start with a brief story. I was an undergrad, obviously, like you guys are, and then I went and taught high school for 6 years, and I went to grad school. In between, I went from being a 2.8 student to a 4.0 student. What happened? Well, I'd spent 6 years writing exams. I knew a whole lot more about exam taking than when I was an undergrad. So what I want to talk about now in particular relates to 231 exams, but I think this generalizes across all of your exams. My belief is that by thinking and approaching exams this way, that you can make like a 0.5 difference in your overall GPA. So I'm going to talk about 231 exams, but at the same time I want to talk about taking exams in general. And there are really two things going on here. One is learning the material, and the other is taking the exams. And my assumption when I was an undergrad, and from many conversations I've had, many of you also have this, is that well, if I learn the material, the exams will take care of themselves. And that's actually wrong. You want to think strategically about exams. How do I do well on this particular professor's exams? And in some cases, all you have to work on is watching the professor. But in other cases, such as 231, we give you old exams to look at so you can think about these strategically. When I was a grad student, I used to amaze other students by telling them what was going to be on the exam. Here's what the professor is interested in. These are the types of questions they're going to ask. And it's amazing how easy it is to 4-point an exam if you've already figured out what's going to be on there. So you want to think about things strategically. Now, what does that mean? Well, think about the kinds of things that a professor emphasizes. If you've got old exams, then you've got questions and you've got specifics that you can look at. But even if you don't have exams, you can observe what the professor emphasizes and keep track of that. So while you're learning the material, be thinking strategically about the exams. And of course, after you get past a midterm, now you have a set of questions to work from, and that will then prepare you better for the final exam. So when you look at an exam, what are some of the things you look for? Well, first of all, look at patterns. What are the kinds of questions that are asked? And you can then start to classify questions, and then when you see them on an exam, you can say, okay, I'm comfortable with this. And if you've had a chance to work at those, you might actually know, all right, here's how I messed up that kind of question. So you get a question, you go, yeah, okay, I recognize this kind of question, and I know what to watch out for because I made this kind of mistake when I was preparing for this. Okay, so that's thinking about things strategically. You get patterns that you look for and recognize. Now, you're not going to get all of them, but that's okay, because the more you recognize, the better you feel about it. It's like, yeah, okay, I got that one. Yep, I recognize that, and you feel a lot better about that as you go along. After a midterm, go back and analyze the questions. Again, you're thinking strategically. Okay, so which ones did I mess up on? You want two categories. You want the ones that you knew but made a mistake on the exam, and the ones that you didn't know that material. Okay, so why was it that you didn't know that? Okay, why didn't you see that you didn't know that? So analyze, put those questions into two buckets, and then look at the skills necessary for the ones where you understood the material but you got the question wrong. Were you doing it too fast? Were you doing something in your head that you shouldn't have been doing in your head, and so on? And then for the others, it's like, okay, so how did I miss the fact that I didn't understand that? For me, one thing that helped me out a lot was just teaching. As you realize, as soon as you start explaining something to somebody, you get halfway through it and you realize, maybe I didn't know this as well as I did. And so working together with other people and explaining things is a huge benefit. So let me talk about some specifics for 231. So what I have on the screen here is a midterm exam, second midterm. And let's go down and take a look at a particularly messy question. And you can't do this kind of question in your head. So this is a kind, there's a lot of them on there. Here's a figure. Now you need to trace through that. If you try to do this in your head, you're doomed because you will mess something up. And so what can I do with this? Well, first thing you can do is write down the variables as they happen. And so I make a big table. Okay, so we've got a D1, and I need some room for that. And we have an N, and then we have an X, and we have a Y, and we have an L, and I have an I, and then when I get to my function, we're going to have a W and an S. All right? And so now I need to keep track of these. And we start out, and this starts out to be empty, and my N is 0, and the others don't exist yet. I come down here, and for X in my file pointer, so that's the first line there. So X is really the string 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. Come down here, it says Y. Oh, let's split that. I don't have much room here. It's a 1, a 2, a 3, 4, and a 5. Okay, so L starts out being empty for I in L. So what happens is, for I and Y, so go back to Y, and what's the first thing? That will be the character 1. Okay, and what do? We append that onto L, so that now has a 1 in there. Okay, we go through the loop. Oh, let's get the next I. That's 2. And then we append that on there, so that's 1 and 2. And then we go through and we get a 3, and I keep appending on there, and I know what's going to happen. I'm going to have my L has I've appended each thing onto there. It looks an awful lot like Y. 4 and 5. Okay, so there's my L, and then what do? As I call F4, and I pass it in an L, and the default is S. So yeah, that gets there. My W, this is immutable. Okay, so my W refers to that list. I'm sorry, it's mutable, not immutable. Okay, so now I go through, and for each I in W, I append on, I do plus equals I. So we go through here, and what do? So my S will get the character 1, and then it will get 1 and 2, and then it will get 1, 2, and 3, ... I see what's going on here. 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. We return S, and that gets assigned to D1 of N. What is my N? Oops, I forgot to increment that. Fix that up here. You can see I already blew it here. So D of 1 gets my string 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. And now I loop back up to here, grab the next X. That's a 6, 7, 8, 9. And repeat. Go through all that. Now, I'm not going to go through it, but you can see how I have been writing everything down. That's what your paper ought to look like. If you're not writing this down, you're trying to do it in your head, and you're doomed. Now, suppose you're having trouble following your way through this, and you keep messing up. What can you do then? Well, one thing we can do is there is this neat little site called www.pythontutor.com. and it visualizes all the steps going through there. Now, one of the problems with Python Tutor is that you can't read a file. And so what you have to do is take something like this and say, oh, well, what am I really doing here? Well, it's really I make a list out of this. Right. And then I can go through and do it. So it can't read files, but I can kludge that. So if I take a look, I copied and pasted in there, and after you copy and paste, there's indentation problems. You got to fix those up. You can see here that I fixed up the FP to be a list of strings. That's good enough. Now I can visualize the execution of this, and down here I can step through one at a time, or I can go all the way through the end. Going all the way through to the end is not very interesting. And watch what happens here. This draws out everything that we would have there. There's my FP, which now is a list, my D1, which is an empty dictionary, my N, and now I start going through my loop. I get an X, and you notice that so my N got a plus equals 1, I get a Y, which is a list, and then I get the L, which is empty, and then we go through and we fill up the list one step at a time. And then notice here, I have, here is the namespace for the main part, and here's the namespace for the F4 function. And now we go through, we keep stepping through this. And if you haven't noticed, I guess I forgot to point this out, there is a little arrow over here that's pointing to the current line that I'm executing. You can actually do this in Spider, but this is much fancier way to do this. And so I gradually go through step by step, and as I'm going through, you'll notice that my string here is growing. Until we're done, and now I have a return value, and that return value now gets assigned to my D here, right? Dictionary 1 gets that, and so on, and I can step through I can step through the code, and you can use this as a way to check your work that you were drawing out. If you made a mistake, you can now use this as a way to check. So, all right. So what did I talk about here? I was talking about a different way of thinking about your exams. Think about them strategically, and keep that in mind all the time. And when this doesn't replace having to understand the material. What I'm talking about is maximizing your understanding on an exam. Still got to learn the material, right? But you can't think that that's done. You have to think about exams strategically, and you can do this type of approach, the strategic view of exams, in any course. But hopefully I've given you some ideas on how to do this in 231.